Welcome to the February 17th session of the Phoenix Congress, where we are writing a blueprint for a better America. This legislative package will end poverty with universal basic income, end mass incarceration with major criminal justice reform, and end the endless wars by bringing our troops home and reducing our military budget. Today's session is the 10th of 21 public hearings on the 2022 legislative package, and we'll review Title II, Ensuring Domestic Tranquility. Sections 201 to 222 are relative to a 10-year truce on guns and abortions. These sessions will alternate between Mondays and Thursdays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern through March 28th. For those following along at home, you can find a link to the legislative package in the description below or at bit.ly/B, A, lowercase Dropbox. If you have any questions about today's sections, you can submit them in the chat. And if you'd like to offer questions or other testimony for future hearings, please use the link in the description below. Before starting, I'd like to invite you to join me in reciting and stating the preamble to the Constitution of the United States to remind us of our duties as Americans and set the intention for what we are trying to do today. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. With that, I'd like to welcome the delegate from North Carolina's 8th District to continue his testimony on the Blueprint for a Better America.
Thank you, Mixed Chair. For the record, my name is Brian. I'm an organizer with the American Union and a Phoenix Congress delegate in good standing in what's currently North Carolina's 8th District. Today, we're going to look at Title II, Ensuring Domestic Tranquility. And there's a very specific reason that the framers wrote this into the preamble as our second duty. There'd been an incident the year before. There was an attempted insurrection, and it was triggered by a floundering economy that was crushing people under debt and a Congress who couldn't really get anything done because passing legislation took a supermajority. This might sound familiar to a lot of us in 2022. We're going through the 4th iteration of the Phoenix cycle in America. We're dealing with these problems again, and this legislative package is an effort to address some of these systemic problems. So our first section, Section 201, is the findings. And I'd like to just go ahead and read these into the record and then talk more about it. The Congress finds the following. 1. In the 21st century political battlefield, two of the most polarizing issues are guns and abortions. Political parties use them as wedge issues, dividing Americans by stoking fears that the other party will take away access to one of these things. 2. Proponents of restricting access to guns and abortion are a minority of the American people. According to Gallup polls in 2021, just 19% of Americans support making all abortion illegal, and 80% oppose a handgun ban. 3. Proponents of restricting access to guns and abortion are motivated by the idea of preventing needless deaths. Other provisions of this legislative package will reduce the demand for abortion as well as gun deaths, which are mostly suicides. 4. By declaring a truce on these issues for a period of time, where all sides both give and gain concessions, America can better focus on addressing the root causes of needless deaths. The purpose of this title is to promote domestic tranquility by removing certain inflammatory legislative proposals from consideration for 10 years. And so I have this question for the American people. What if we agreed to stop fighting over these issues? What could we accomplish if we were willing to put these to the side and instead work together? Republicans and Democrats, they divide us. They keep us polarized. They keep us angry at each other. They demonize the other party, and then they force us to choose a team. Say, you've got to be either red team or blue team. You've got to pick the lesser of two evils. And they create caricatures of the other party and demonize them and mudsling, and it's horrible for America's mental health. We need a better way forward. And to address these wedge issues, Title II declares a 10-year truce on guns and abortions. Now, to make this work, to create the political pressure so that Congress will put this legislative package on the president's desk, we need a block of swing voters. 3.5% will control the balance of power in Washington, D.C. And swing voters are independents. A plurality of voters in this country identify as independents, but they generally lean towards one party or the other. And so to bring them together behind one legislative package, we want to take the fangs out of these threats that both political parties say the other side will enact. Both sides get something, both sides get a concession. That's how we bring the people to the table, and the rest of Title II is the details. So with that, Mixed Chair, I think that concludes my testimony for Section 201, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, we have a question from Tony in California. This is the most polarizing aspect of the blueprint. Why is it called ensuring domestic tranquility?
The short answer is because ensuring domestic tranquility is a duty. It's one of the things that the framers put in the preamble. This is what we're supposed to be doing. And I guess the long answer, though, is because these are the issues that are stopping us from working together. This isn't to say that people who care about guns and abortions don't have sincerely held beliefs, but it's to recognize that there are larger issues in this country that we're being distracted from. And in order to work together to solve them and ensure domestic tranquility, we've got to find a way to work together. And so if you don't want to work together, if you don't want to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars, you can find a reason not to in Title II. You can find a reason to quit and say, nope, this is unacceptable. Let's just live with 10 million children going to sleep in poverty. Let's just live with 2 million Americans behind bars. Let's just live with this $750 billion spent on the military industrial complex. That's rather have all that than declare a truce on guns and abortion. There are people out there that feel that way. It's okay. But the American Union of Swing Voters and the Blueprint for a Better America looks to bring together the marginalized middle, the people who are willing to make compromises in order to address these really root causes. To use a terrible environmental analogy, this is the oil that we're pouring on the troubled waters. So Title II strives to ensure domestic tranquility because it introduces something that all successful relationships have: compromise. That's how we get domestic tranquility. You can't have a household that relationships don't work without compromise. And so if we're going to come together as the American people, as an American family, we're going to have to make compromises to work together. It's what the framers did so they could ensure domestic tranquility. The whole Constitution, after the preamble, is a collection of compromises. And so we can follow their model and do the same thing in 2022 to build a better America.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question. So we're talking about this truce would prevent certain types of legislation, but we see a lot of battle over these issues in the courts, particularly, especially including the U.S. Supreme Court. So might that just amplify these issues in an unwelcome way if legislation is no longer an option and everything has to funnel through the courts, which have become increasingly politicized and polarized?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a frivolous concern. A lot of these things end up in courts anyway, right? If we pass universal background checks, like Title II does, will some states, some people try to sue to block it? Probably. But this is a legislative package. This is the tool that we have. There are other problems that need to be addressed with different tools, but legislation is the only one we have available to us as a union of swing voters. We have one opportunity to put a specific legislative package before all the candidates for Congress and say, these are our terms, take it or leave it in exchange for our votes. And so, yeah, the courts will still continue to play a role in these issues. But as far as legislation goes, this is what we can do in 2022.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, Section 201 is assigned to the subcommittee on the findings. You may proceed to Section 202.
All right, thank you, Mixed Chair. Section 202 is the codification of the Hyde Amendment. The Hyde Amendment is a restriction. It's been tucked into the budget every year since 1977. So for 45 years, we have restricted the use of federal funds for abortions, generally with exceptions for rape, incest, or to protect the life of the mother. And in recent years, there have been efforts to eliminate the Hyde Amendment. President Biden proposed a budget that did not include the Hyde Amendment. That budget passed the House, and then the Senate added it back in. But this is going to be an ongoing fight. And look, this is a policy from the 1970s that should probably be re-examined. There's lots of, of things that we need to re-examine. But for 10 years, this would be a compromise. The Hyde Amendment would be codified into law. The language comes from the Hyde Amendment Codification Act, Senate Bill 142 from 2013. And it's a compromise. For 10 years, the framers punted slavery for 20 years. But this is different. The Constitution didn't make any effort to address the underlying problem of slavery. They just kicked the can down the road. The underlying problem was the idea that some humans could own other humans based on the color of their skin. It was wrong, and they didn't address it. We're going to do something different. What is the issue that we want to address here? And that's abortions. Abortions are down. Abortions are at a 40-year low, even though our population has gone up by 30, 40% over that time. So what is the problem? Why can't we get it any lower? What is the problem that it's solving? And if you ask women who have sought abortions, 2/3 of them say they can't afford the baby. We can fix that with universal basic income. Not everybody can afford to take time off to stay with a newborn baby. We can fix that with 18 weeks of paid family leave. There's a lot of social issues that drive abortion. And so by focusing on those abortions, we can by focusing on fixing those issues, we can bring down the number of abortions even lower, which should be a win for everybody. Let me just briefly go over the language that is in the actual Hyde Amendment here. Let me try and share my screen. So this will prohibit funding for abortions. I want to be clear that there are exceptions for if the pregnancy is the result of an act of rape or incest, or if the woman suffering from physical disorder, injury, illness, any life-endangering physical condition that puts their life at risk, then a doctor can certify that, and federal funds could be used for an abortion to protect the life of the mother. So it's important that those protections are there. They're there in the existing Hyde Amendment, and they'd be codified under Section 202. And so with that, Mixed Chair, I think that concludes my testimony. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, Section 202 is assigned to the Subcommittee on Title II. You may proceed to Section 211.
Thank you. Section 211 is the firearms transfers. This is House Resolution 8, the bipartisan background checks of 2019. It was passed by the House, died in the Senate. And when it comes to universal background checks, according to a March 2021 poll, 84% of voters, including 77% of Republicans, support universal background checks. And so what this bill would do is prohibit a firearm transfer between private parties unless either one, a licensed gun dealer, manufacturer, or importer first takes possession of the firearm to conduct a background check, or the transfer is exempt. And there's a half a dozen reasons that are written into the law that would make it exempt. And so I will, once again, take a look at these. All right, so the background checks act would not, the background checks would not be required. Obviously, people can still do them, but they wouldn't be required under this law. In the case of law enforcement, armed forces acting within the course and scope of their official duties. A transfer that's a gift between family members, spouses, domestic partners, grandparents, as long as there's no reason to believe that the firearm is going to be used in a crime or that the other person would be prohibited from possessing firearms. So parents can still hand down guns to their kids as long as there's no reason, they don't know of any reason why they shouldn't. Transfers from estates at death, temporary transfers. This is like exigent circumstances. So if somebody is in need of a firearm to prevent imminent death, great bodily harm from domestic violence or stalking or anything like that, then there's an exemption. You can give them a gun to protect themselves. There's transfers approved by the Attorney General or a temporary transfer for a couple of different reasons. So you can loan somebody, give somebody a gun at a shooting range for the purpose of target shooting. You can loan someone a gun to take hunting, as long as you have no reason to believe that they're going to do anything illegal with it and that they're going to be complying with the law and permit requirements for hunting, trapping, whatever. And the other exemption is just while you're in the presence of the transferor. So you can, as long as you're with that person, it's exempt from the background checks. So that's that is what the exemptions are. Once again, like, what is the symptom that we're trying to address here? We said that abortions have gone down over the last few decades, but gun deaths, on the other hand, they have gone up. In 2020, we hit an all-time high of more than 45,000 people, like all ages, all races, all genders. 45,000 people lost their lives to gun deaths in 2020. And so, like abortion, this legislative package will address it in a number of ways to bring those numbers down. First, 57% of those gun deaths were suicides. And so what causes deaths of despair? Things like financial problems, drug abuse, depression, difficulties with relationships. Poverty exacerbates all of those conditions. And so by establishing a firm economic floor with universal basic income, we're going to improve America's overall mental health and reduce suicides. A small but highly visible portion of gun deaths comes from mass shootings. And sadly, this is not a new phenomenon in America. We've been here before. 80 years ago, during the last iteration of the Phoenix cycle, we had a problem with mass shootings. The threads of society were becoming unraveled because of rampant wealth inequality and economic injustice. And Sebastian Junger wrote a book called Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging. And he wrote, quote, "The first time that the United States suffered a wave of rampage shootings was during the 1930s, when society had been severely stressed and fractured by the Great Depression." Now, we have a lot of those same stresses and fractures again today. And that's, it's kind of, unfortunately, it's kind of easy to forget after a couple of years of the pandemic, but mass shootings were in the news constantly, and we can address some of these problems through universal basic income plus a value-added tax to address wealth inequality. And try to patch the fraying fabric of our societal bonds. So it was 4 years ago this week that there was a mass shooting in Parkland, Florida, and Matt Taibbi, he wrote a piece in Rolling Stone after it called "If We Want the Kids to Stop Killing, the Adults Have to Stop Too." And I'll put a link in the description below. And he wrote, "Deep-seated cultural ideas about the virtue of military supremacy and the political efficacy of violence," he said, were related to the rise in mass shootings. And he concluded that this madness won't stop until we stop believing that killing makes us strong, or that we can kill without guilt or consequence just by being precise. What beliefs like that actually make us is insane and damaged, and it's no surprise that our kids too are beginning to become collateral damage. Look, military glorification is one of the causes of gun violence in our country. By striving to end the endless wars, by reducing military spending in this legislative package, by reducing that glorification of violence, and at the same time demonstrating that reasonable, rational adults can work out their differences peacefully, we can address this mindset, we can address these core issues, and we can bring down the gun deaths. So that is a goal that all of us, I think, support. And Mr. Chair, that concludes my testimony for Section 211. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
This is a federal piece of legislation. Would this bar states or localities from instituting additional legislation related to guns or abortions, for that matter?
No, this would not change any of that. So if they're currently able to do that, they could still do it.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, Section 211 is assigned to the Subcommittee on Title II. You may proceed to Section 212.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. The next two are going to be real quick. Section 212 is just some technical and conforming amendments, updates to references in the United States Code to the firearms transfer sections. That's it. And that concludes my testimony for Section 212.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, Section 212 is assigned to the Subcommittee on Title II. You may proceed to Section 213.
All right, and then Section 213, no firearm registry authorized. It does exactly what it says. It addresses the objection that universal background checks equal a national firearm registry. It's two parts. A1 says explicitly no, it does not authorize the establishment directly or indirectly of a national firearms registry. And then A2 says that states' rights still apply here. States have the authority to, they aren't prohibited from creating their own by this section. And that concludes my testimony for Section 213.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, Section 213 is assigned to the Subcommittee on Title II. You may proceed to Section 221.
All right, Section 221, criminalizing introduction of gun or abortion bans. So this is the truce. This is the part where everybody gets something, everybody makes a compromise or concession. And so in exchange for codifying the Hyde Amendment, the agreement is no introduction of abortion bans for the next 10 years. In exchange for getting universal background checks passed, no introduction of gun bans for the next 10 years. This is the truce, and if we Americans can work it out, how do we enforce it? And so Section 221 is the enforcement mechanism. It says that in the House and the Senate, it will not be in order for any joint resolution, amendment, motion, conference report. You can't consider any of these things if it would amend or repeal the codification of the Hyde Act, if it would amend or appeal the universal background checks, if it would prohibit the manufacture or sale or possession of a firearm, then it could not be considered, or if it would prohibit or restrict access to abortion, it could not be considered. And this violation would be a Class B misdemeanor, punishable by between 5 and 30 days imprisonment. It would be a criminal act to violate and break this truce. I think that concludes my testimony for section 221, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have a question. Is this constitutional to make it a crime for a member of Congress to introduce a certain type of bill?
So I guess as far as I know, it's never been tried before specifically. But I believe, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe it's constitutional. According to Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2. It says that each house may determine the rules of its proceedings. So the first part of this section is the part that says you're not allowed to introduce these things. And so the Constitution says the House and Senate can make whatever rules, and if they want to pass a rule or a law that says you're not allowed to introduce these things, the Constitution gives them the authority to do that. We saw an example of this recently in December of 2021 to increase the debt ceiling, and the Senate needed to be able to pass it without it being filibustered. And so they passed a law that said the certain piece of legislation could go directly to the floor and couldn't be filibustered. And the House and Senate both agreed that that was how the rules in the Senate would work. And once it was law, that's how they worked. And so we can use that same mechanism to say, by law, you can't mess with these sections of the United States Code or introduce things that would restrict or prohibit guns or abortion. So that's the first part. The second part of the question is, can you punish? Can this be a criminal offense and not just a procedural rule? And so the answer to that question is yes. Back in 1906, the Supreme Court ruled in Burton versus United States that Congress has a power to make an offense against the United States for a senator or representative to do certain things. In this case, it was a law that the Senate had passed that said if you're a sitting member of Congress, you can't get compensation for services. There's certain businesses and things you can't do, and Senator Burton did it anyway. And so they convicted him of that, and we can do the same. So that same principle, again, Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2 says that each house may punish its members for disorderly behavior. And so if we define Section 221 defines that disorderly behavior, and they can decide that they should be punished. Will this be challenged in court? I'd be shocked if it wasn't. But again, the Supreme Court has said that the House and Senate have the power to do these things. So you could also look at it as an opportunity for civil disobedience. If you're a member of Congress who believes really strongly that guns should be banned or abortion should be banned, you could try and introduce one of these things and then take your 5 to 30 days in jail as an act of civil disobedience. I think that would be, I think that you could look at it that way. So I guess that's my answer. Yes, I believe this is constitutional.
Thank you. We do have a question from Tony in California. 1 in 4 Americans see abortion as a key voting issue. For a politician to see this position as valuable, the swing voter bloc has to be greater than the turnout these issues produce at the ballot box. Do you think it's possible for any Democrat or Republican politician to be able to embrace this plan?
I hope so. That's it's definitely the purpose. But yeah, so as we talked about, if you're looking for a reason to throw this whole package out, you can find one in Title II. And this is how legislative packages work. Is there's a whole bunch of stuff in them. Most of it's good, some of it's not. And speaking as a former legislator and observing what they do in Congress, if you want to make it work, if you want all the good things, then you accept accept the bad parts and support the entire package. And so politicians, any member of Congress has had to do that already. So they have the ability to look past parts that they don't like in exchange for being the most transformational Congress in 80 years, the Congress that ends poverty, ends mass incarceration, and ends the endless wars. But to the specific question of, all right, so 1 in 4 Americans see abortion as a key voting issue. And they say, well, if and maybe they're not satisfied by just codifying the Hyde Amendment. Maybe they would like to fight over the Hyde Amendment for the next 10 years. But they really, really want the idea of a federal ban on abortion to be considered in the next 10 years. And so they're like, look, congressional candidate, if you support this, then we won't support you. And so Tony's question is, well, then that calculation is your block of swing voters has to be larger than the people who this is that are single issue voters on this. And so this is where being a block of swing voters really comes into play, because what are the alternatives for someone for whom guns or abortions is their single issue? They can refuse to vote for the candidate of the party that they most closely align with, but they're not going to go vote for the other candidate because that would be even worse. So they could just refuse to vote at all, and then they'll be the spoilers, leaving the American Union to be the deciders. So if going to guns, right? If there are Democrats who like the idea of universal background checks and like the idea of no abortion bans for 10 years, but are unwilling to say that we can't consider any gun bans for 10 years. What are their alternatives? They can go vote for the Republican, or they cannot vote at all. They'll be spoilers, leaving the American Union as the deciders. So we're leaning into this. The two-party system is what we have. The Republicans and Democrats win 99% of the time. We can make the most of it by unionizing as swing voters. So I think that's how Republicans and Democrats who want to win their races and earn this block of swing votes can persuade themselves that the package as a whole is worth supporting.
Thank you. Yes, and I have another question that's relevant, that's topical. If the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, strikes down Roe v. Wade, how would that impact this?
This really wasn't written with that sort of scenario in mind. 60% of the American people, 60% of voters don't want to see Roe versus Wade overturned, but it could happen. So this section specifically prohibits the introduction of new restrictions on guns and abortions. So to reduce restrictions, to increase access to guns and abortion is not prohibited under this section, which means that, if the Democrats were in control and Roe versus Wade was struck down, they could pass a law to try and undo the court's decision. Similarly, if Republicans were in control and they wanted to ease restrictions on some type of gun or something like that, this section wouldn't prohibit that. It only stops the threat of the other party will take your guns or abortion away if they get elected. You've got to vote for us. We're the lesser of two evils. It just takes away that argument. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that helps. So specifically, this is we keep saying truce on guns and abortion, but specifically, more accurately, it's no new restrictions on guns or abortions for the next decade. That is a more accurate description.
Correct. And
okay.
So, yeah. And like maybe as we address these core issues, these societal problems, maybe in 5 or 8 years or something, like, look, things are going great. Maybe we don't even need all the restrictions we have now. And So they would be able to loosen restrictions, but not tighten them for 10 years.
The libertarians probably really like this.
There's something in it for everybody.
Yes.
Everybody will come out ahead if this ends up on the president's desk.
Fantastic. Okay. Seeing no further questions, section 221 is assigned to the subcommittee on Title II. You may proceed to section 222.
All right, and this is another really short one. Section 222 is one sentence. It says section 221 is repealed 10 years after the date of enactment. That's it. So after 10 years, the restrictions, the criminalization of certain introductions, that will go away after 10 years. Again, this is reminiscent of what the framers did with the Constitution. They couldn't deal with slavery at the time, so they said, all right, no restrictions on the slave trade for 20 years. Just as a side note, that was a compromise to push it back to 1808. Originally, the committee had recommended the year 1800, and then they compromised and said, all right, we'll make it a nice round 20 years. And so again, we're not doing what the framers did, which was kicking the can down the road and ignoring the underlying problems. This isn't trying to put a Band-Aid on the issues around guns and abortions as much as it is trying to heal the wound underneath, reduce the demand for abortions, reduce the drivers of gun deaths. And if we can heal the wound, then the Band-Aid will have done its work. I think I mixed my metaphors there, but
the Band-Aid can come off.
Yeah, the Band-Aid can come off. Yeah. So, all right, next year, I think that concludes my testimony for section 222.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, section 222 is assigned to the subcommittee on Title II. I would like to thank the delegate for his testimony.
Thank you. Again, these are polarizing issues, but reasonable, rational adults can work things out. Compromises are how relationships work, and we, the American people, need to have a better relationship with each other. And so, yeah, this is a good faith proposal to try and put our differences aside temporarily to solve some core problems.
Fantastic, thank you. The next session of the Phoenix Congress will be held on Monday, February 21st. We will review sections 301 to 315 of Title III relative to authorizations for military force, reducing the military budget to 2005 levels, and reducing the number of foreign military bases. This hearing is adjourned.